populist American public maintained strong, isolationist, non-interventionist views. But President Franklin Roosevelt represented Rockefeller interests and naval, corporate, and Freemasonry interests. So Roosevelt employed a practice very common to Standard Oil. He ordered that petroleum supplies be cut off to Japan, which would throw Japan into an economic shock and thereby provoke Japan to retaliate with a military first strike against the United States. Roosevelt and his naval strategists realized that Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, then still only a territory of the U.S., was the obvious target of a Japanese strike. Through the dedicated research of Robert B. Stinnett, author of Day of Deceit, and Mark Emerson Willey, author of Pearl Harbor, Mother of All Conspiracies, and through the recent release of Freedom of Information Act documents, the evidence clearly shows that the U.S. military intelligence had broken secret Japanese codes and decrypted intercepted secret Japanese radio transmissions, clearly showing many days before December 7th that the Japanese were planning to attack Pearl Harbor. President Roosevelt and his advisors chose to purposely withhold the intercepted intelligence from key U.S. military leaders in the Pacific who would later be scapegoated. Roosevelt chose to sacrifice Short and the lives of American military men on the USS Arizona and the many other ships stationed in Pearl Harbor in order to jolt the isolationist public with a shock that would traumatize the American public into joining the French and British in a Second World War.
The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us.
I was in basic training out in California, near San Pedro, I think it was. And I had gotten a weekend pass and gone into a little town nearby to a restaurant for dinner. And Pearl Harbor and I went to a movie, and Pearl Harbor was struck while I was in the movie. It was already daylight there, and or just approaching daylight when Pearl Harbor was attacked. I got back to my air base, and they said, "Where's your uniform?" I said I was they'd gone to a movie. They said, "Well, where's your pass?" I showed them my pass to go to town, and they wanted more ID, and they took me to a guardhouse where they searched me and checked with my squadron to verify that I belonged there. And I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, Pearl Harbor was just bombed, and we're in war. We're at war." That was my first inkling of it, and so we weren't immediately in a war, but we started building up rapidly to engage. And even at the time, I wondered, with my young mind, I was only 17 at the time, and I wondered why our whole fleet was in Pearl Harbor in one place at one time if we suspected the Japanese were coming. It didn't make any sense. And then in later years, I discovered that our new capital aircraft carriers, 3 of them, were at sea, but all the old battleships that were old ships from World War I were in Pearl Harbor and sunk. And that never made good sense to me. And today I'm convinced that Roosevelt and Admiral Kimmel both knew the Japanese were coming. They knew where they were all the time. They knew that they were planning on attacking Pearl Harbor, and they were going to let them do it, and they brought all the old capital ships into Pearl Harbor, anchored them in the facility there inside of the harbor where they could easily be attacked and sunk for a specific reason. I believe that Roosevelt and Admiral Kimmel were calculating that we couldn't win a naval battle with the old World War I ships, the Japanese having new ships. We would have to have newer ships than the Japanese to win in any conflict with them, and they were sacrificing the old fleet to get our public together to build a new fleet. They knew that we had the finances, the money, and the resources to do it. First of all, we had all of our old ships into Pearl Harbor. They were all sunk